Hello everyone and welcome back to the book club. Today we are joined by author Barbara Ann Wright. Barbara has just published her second book in the Sisters of Sarras series, The Scout and The Scoundrel. Welcome, Barbara.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
Let's start with just talking a little bit about the Sisters of Sarras series. Where did the inspiration for the book come from and how did you decide on the three unique personalities of the sisters?
I wanted to do a series for a long time that where each book was more standalone, where I had an overarching plot, but it was kind of in the background and I focused a lot more on the characters. And I decided on sisters because I wanted that family dynamic where you both love your family and sometimes want to strangle them. So the personalities for them, I just kind of decided early on what I wanted them to go through and then how I thought that might shape them.
So you said you wanted a series which, when each book could be read as a standalone. Why was it important to you?
I think because I haven't done that yet. I've written a couple series where it really is just, one book picks up right after the other. And if you come in the middle, you're going to be completely lost. And I guess that could happen this time, especially with the background plot, with the war and everything. But I think I was like, I really wanted to focus on these characters, like, 2 characters per book. And I want to just keep the focus on them rather than including a bunch of other people in their stories.
I actually read book 2 before book 1 and I had no trouble following book 2. So I think that strategy really worked. In writing The Scout and The Scoundrel, how long did it take you to write the book and what did anything major change between when you started and toward, with the final edit?
I always say it takes me about 6 to 9 months, but it usually ends up being longer than that because I either think I've got more time than I have, or like you were saying, I change everything. So I changed a lot about it as I went. I had some different plot points, what I wanted to do, where I wanted these people to be. Initially, it was a lot more stuff happens in a city, and it wound up being almost everything out in the wilderness. So I usually just sort of write whatever's in my head, and then I just go and go and go. Of course, at the end, this means I have to edit a lot. So, I edited it down quite a bit from what it used to be.
I have kind of a specific question. In the book, sometimes you refer to the Golden Glove character as the Vox and other time as Vox. Is there a reason behind that?
Probably because I got tired of typing V. I don't know. It's probably some kind of really silly thing like that. I wanted it to be the Vox. I kind of designed that character to be a little bit self-centered, and almost I could hear them saying in my head, you got to say the whole thing. You have to say the. So if I dropped the, it was usually because it was a character who wasn't as familiar with them maybe as Zara was for it.
So where did the inspiration for Vox come from? That's a very unique touch, and I really enjoyed that.
Oh, good. I'm glad you liked it. It's a fun character to write. I wanted a friend for Zara, a companion for her. And since most people annoy her, I thought I want someone she can really bond with. And that turned out to be just someone who, can only talk to really her. She could share her thoughts with it, but also it takes on a little bit of her personality when she bonds with it, with them rather. And, I thought, it's really her only friend, besides her sisters, I guess, in the book. And I thought, who would this character really take to almost immediately? And that's kind of how the box developed.
So Zara, as a person, she loves structure and logic. And then you have Roni, who's like very, cheeky and bold and doesn't like to take orders. So was one character more difficult to write than the other? Did they both come naturally to you? Or did you have to think more about how you'd put one down, how you develop one more than the other?
Roni was definitely easier to write. She is more like me, I think. Zara was a little harder because I did not want her to be unlikable, yet I wanted to stay true to the character that I had in mind. So she was a little harder to write just because I never wanted to seem like I was laughing at her or the audience was laughing at her, more that just you could go with her on this journey she's taking where she learns more about herself and about everyone else. So yeah, it was definitely harder to keep her voice in mind.
In the case of the character of Zara, I had some kind of vibe with her. Is she on the kind of equivalent of the autism spectrum? Was that your angle, or is she just aloof?
A lot of people have asked me this, if I did that deliberately. I must say I didn't have the words autism in mind when I wrote her. I wanted to write a character that I guess I don't see a lot in fiction, that's also sympathetic and not just somebody who is like, okay, there's a person who thinks differently and then there's a person who's kind of a jerk. And I was like, I never really wanted her to be a jerk, as someone who doesn't care about other people's feelings. She cares about other people's feelings. It's just she's sometimes a little unaware of, one, what they are, and then two, how to deal with them. So she's never mean, like I think sometimes writers can make characters seem a little mean. And it's like, so I guess that's, I didn't have that in mind, but a lot of people have said that. And so if anybody can see themselves in this character and think, oh, that's much more true to life than anything I've seen, then I'm beyond happy with that.
I have a slightly random question about Vox. And I don't know if I missed this in the first book, but Vox is made of metal, right? And do we ever find out what metal? I'm asking just because metal tends to rust. Vox is out in the forest. Zara doesn't seem to really need to take care of Vox in any way. So is that just because of the magic?
We find out a little bit more about the history of what the Vox is, and if there are any others like it in the world in the third book. But I just wanted it to be more like it's something ancient, and that whoever made it had access to better technology for one, and then a different sort of magic than the people that are used to. So they're like from an ancient civilization that fell. So I always pictured it as being partly magic and then partly like different metal alloys that the people in the book just have never even heard of.
And so are we going to see characters like Vox in future books?
Yes, there's a major one in book 3, and then you find out more because book 3 is from Giselle's perspective. She's the mage, and she knows what the Vox is just upon seeing it. She knows what it is, and then she knows about it and things like it. She's studied histories of inventions like this one, so. They may not come off as fully realized characters because I wanted the Vox to be unique because it's achieved sentience, and that's something that things like it don't usually have. But yeah, they'll find out a whole lot more about it in the third book.
So are Zara and Giselle going to work with each other without killing each other?
They work with each other for a little bit in book 3, but when they have to go off and when Giselle has to have her own adventures, she actually ends up going with Roni, who has the Vox with her. And she's very, very jealous of this. She really wants to study it and talk to them and find out more about them. And it just kills her when Zara doesn't want her to wear the glove to bond with it, to talk to it, to anything.
Are all of the sisters identifying as somewhere on the queer spectrum?
All of my books seem to have people who are just like, they're somewhere. They date. They have preferences, but they'll date anybody. So yeah, I would say that largely all of my characters are either bisexual or pansexual, because it just seems like I don't like to limit them. So it's like I could see Adela or Zara dating exclusively women, but I could see Giselle dating whomever. But yeah, it seems like everybody in my books falls somewhere in the spectrum there.
So if the sisters took you for a date, where do you think each one would take you?
Oh, Lord. Adela would take you to a high-class restaurant. That's it. If she was really trying to woo somebody. Zara, poor Zara, wouldn't have any idea. I feel like Zara would be the most, her gestures would be the most heartfelt, but that she would just like show up at your door with something like, instead of flowers, it would be like a pineapple or something, because she would be like, I know you like pineapple, so this is a guaranteed win, but you'd be like, it's a little strange, but very endearing. But as to where she would take you, if it was her idea, it's definitely somewhere where she's comfortable. So probably like a park or something like this with fewer people, but nice scenery. And Giselle, I think, would take somebody to like a nightclub or something really loud, where there's dancing and food and a lot of stuff going on.
That sounds like fun. Do you have a preference? Which one would you choose?
Oh, Lord. If I had to choose for somebody for the whole books, it would be Sarah Nunez, the woman who runs the donkey's rest, the bar. I would date Sarah Nunez in a heartbeat.
Your military structure, is it based on a specific military branch somewhere in the world, or did you just make rank and structure that fit your own world?
Very, very loosely on probably the U.S. Army, because I looked into different ranks, different militaries in the world, and there are so many. And it seems like even if you're like, a second lieutenant, half something or other, and it's like, ugh. So I just really cut it in half and cut everything down and was like, okay, there's like 5 ranks. And even then, I wanted Zara to be kind of apart from that. So she's really, I guess, what in the U.S. Army would be a specialist. And I was just like, yeah, okay. So the leader of a scouting group is called a commander, and that's it. And then just sort of hand-wavy about it, mostly so that if people tell me, well, technically she'd be a blah, and I can say, I made up my own thing, and she's what I say she is.
That's a good point.
But was this in any way different to write? Did you have to do a bit more research to write this book?
I had to do research more on the environmental factors, because usually when most of my books have taken place in some sort of urban setting more than in the middle of nowhere, though I have done in the middle of nowhere before, but I really wanted like the cold and the forest itself to be a factor, and then the terrain. So I really had to fight to keep all of that in mind, and to think, okay, what might the ground look like, when you're heading up a slope toward a cliff, by a river. And it was like, fortunately for me, that's often very rocky terrain. It's full of little holes and caves and things, because I was like, great, that'll be wonderful for, tension and who's where, and getting everybody separated and bringing them back together. So that was really the only researchy things I had to do, especially for this one, were for terrain and climate.
Do you have a favorite scene from the book?
Yes. I don't want to spoil anything, but it's towards the end when Roni and Zara have really gotten to know each other, and they're having heartfelt conversations, which is really the only conversation that Zara will have. Where they admit their feelings to each other. I would think that one was my favorite, and that one was the most fun to write.
Do you need something in specific to write? Music, or a specific setting, or a specific pen? Tell us about your writing process.
It's all over the map, my writing process. It's evolved over the years, but it's still changing. I have my little writing nook here. I do this because I don't know. I know people's not going to be able to see me, but I have a bunch of bookshelves in my writing nook, and they've got not only books by other people that have inspired me, but little pretty things that I've collected over the years, or my dolls, or little journals. And I think having that around, just being able to, if I'm thinking, to be able to look around and be like, oh, that's neat, that's cool. Or, ooh, sparkles, and then jump back into it. But I've been doing a lot of writing by hand lately, mostly making notes. I always make copious amounts of notes. That's probably the thing that's the most important to me, is being able to have a notebook right here. And there are 3 that I'm pointing at right now on my desk in front of me, that I can pick it up and write a note, or jot something down, or write a page number in, or think, oh, hell, I forgot to put this character in here where I meant them to be, so I'll make a note, put that character back in there. Or like, ooh, she's afraid of water, let's put that in there so I don't forget that later. So that was really it, having a pen or a pencil and a journal nearby to make notes. That's what I have to have, I think, to write.
Does that mean you can write anywhere, so you don't necessarily need to be in a, like, even if you're out and about and you had ideas, would you always have your notebook with you?
Always. I always have my notebook, at least one. And sometimes I'll have, if I'm going to go write somewhere specifically, like to a coffee shop, I'll take my laptop, of course, but I usually have at least 2 or 3 notebooks, because since I have so many, I usually make notes somewhere and then I forget which one it's in. So I'm like, okay, well, let's just take all of them. So my bag is very heavy. But that's, yeah, I like writing other places. I think sometimes that gives a person perspective. Or can, if you have writer's block, can sort of, push you along and be like, oh, here's the thing that I was missing, especially writing outside when the weather's nice, and getting to see, people walk by, or, things happening like leaves blowing or something, and you can suddenly think, aha, that is what I want. I want them to be outside, or I want them to be like that person, or I should put a dog in here, anything that you see that can just sort of jumpstart you. Do
you feel any pressure to add romance to your books, or does that come naturally to your writing?
It used to not come naturally at all. And then in the early 2000s, I wrote The Pyramid Waltz, which is the first book that got published with Bold Strokes Books. I wanted the princess and the courtier, but I wanted them to both be women, because it's hard to find that, or at least it was back then, to find something that had 2 women and then dealt with it in a realistic way, and that wasn't just kind of pornography. And so then it was like, well, I have to have romance, because if these characters are just kind of hanging out, I'm going to die. Because I would be saying, "Kiss her," through the whole thing, which I do now sometimes when reading books or watching television. So, yeah, I always want that element, because I'm like, okay, I want to explore a person's entire personality, and I'm a big romantic. So I think, yeah, I tend to always put romance in it, or I always will, just because I want to do a deep dive into every character's subconscious.
Something that stayed with me was the monster-ish character, the mage on the other side, that felt like unresolved. Is it something that will be explored more in the 3rd book, or was it just for the 2nd?
No, that is a huge part of the 3rd one. In fact, the 3rd book is called The Mage and the Monster, and it is about Giselle and the mage Vale, who makes a very brief appearance in The Scout and The Scoundrel. So yeah, that is their story when they meet, and then we will definitely find out what happens to the mages and all of that's happening out there.
How do you envision the magic in your universe?
So the way I see it is that it is, from an outsider's perspective, it's very hard to understand, because a bunch of what is happening to the mage is happening in their own head. So I get to explore that a whole lot more with Giselle in the 3rd book, so that it's something they have a hard time explaining, but it's more like the meditative trance almost they have to fall into, and then then they can manipulate different areas of their world. But I wanted it from an outsider looking in, it looks like they're not doing anything except paying the price for the magic, which is pain. In mine, it's something very dear to my heart, which is joint pain, because I have rheumatoid arthritis, so doing anything is hard for me, and that I wanted my mages then to have to pay for their very powerful magic by having to be in pain. So that's how I wanted it to seem. It's so from an outsider looking in, especially someone like Zara, it seems kind of dumb that someone would pay this extraordinary price for brief things of magic where it looks like they're doing anything except going, hey, now this is happening. But I really wanted to explore that, and I will in Giselle's book, which is where you see why somebody might pay this price, that being able to achieve this trance, being able to work these magics, these wonders, is really worth any price to someone who can do it.
In your world, how does story development take place? So, like, for example, for the Sisters of Sarras, did you have the outline of all 3 books planned? Do you know roughly where the books were going to go?
I rarely start with anything at all, plot-wise or mapping out-wise. I have my notes that I make. I make extensive notes about character, personality, what they might do, what they've done in their past. And I like to do this so that I can think, okay, I can throw any situation at this character and I'll know how they'll react. So plot-wise, really, I'm just like, I have my main conflict. I want something I want to happen toward the middle and the ending. And even then, the ending often changes because I'm what they call a pantser. I write by the seat of my pants, so that I'm just going. And so I really, and then towards the end, I have to map out stuff a lot more carefully because I'm like all these moving parts. But no, I didn't have any idea what would happen in book 3 while I was writing book 1. And I barely had an idea what would happen in book 1 while I was writing book 1. So I really like to leave myself a lot of room, I say, which I think is the most graceful way to say it, rather than I'm either too stubborn, to write everything down, or just too eager to get to the book so that I don't write much plot stuff down.
Does that lead you down some pathways where you have to then back off because it doesn't lead anywhere?
Oh, definitely. Oh, all the time. You think I'd learned my lesson by now, but no, I have not. And I think of the plot as kind of like a river, and sometimes instead of getting from one end to the other, I'll go down these little tributaries that lead absolutely nowhere. But luckily, and I tell all writers this, I keep all that stuff. So, I go have to cut these 4 scenes or whatever, but I'll put them in a separate folder and keep them. And then if I'm wondering about ideas or just sort of looking to jumpstart my brain on a new project, I'll go and read these and I'll be like, okay, is there anything in here that could be helpful? And especially if I've written a scene that I really, really love and yet I have to cut, then I'll think, you know what, this would be a good fit for this project.
Do you go to writer's retreat?
I have been to some of them. Usually when I go to like a writing retreat, I just go with friends. I have a lot of friends who are writers. Austin is a great city for writing. I go to a lot of conferences, like writers' conferences, to meet other writers, to be a speaker to up-and-coming writers, or just to be a speaker to fans. I do a lot of science fiction and fantasy conventions. They're always a whole lot of fun. I love passing on what I've learned to different people, if it can be helpful to them at all. And so I've done presentations, I've done panels, I've done workshops. I'll pretty much, anywhere that I can get to that's not going to cost me an arm and a leg, I'll go. She said, offering anybody to invite her to anything, especially if they put her up for the night. So
just looking back to your earlier books, have you ever looked at your earlier books and thought, if I'd written this now, I would do something different, or I want to write a sequel or a prequel to a particular book?
Several times, especially as I learn more of the craft of writing, that I think, okay, I might want to change this or that, or I would do that a lot differently, or, I made a reference to that, and I never was comfortable with it, so I would take that out. As for sequels and stuff, I always have ideas for another book in me, especially if you give me the characters already done, like the characters from the Sisters of Sarras series or Pyramid Waltz or any of them. I think, I could write another book about that. Whatever I write next is practical a lot of times, and it's based on what book people seem to enjoy the most or which book sold the most. So oftentimes I'll have a lot of mine in sequels, but I'm like, okay, well, you know what? This book didn't really do really well. It didn't seem to resonate with people as well as this book, so maybe I'll write another one there. And I'm really kicking around the idea of writing a sequel right now to Coils, which is like a fantasy romance comedy in the Greek underworld. And that one a lot of people seem to like. So I thought if I write like an indirect sequel rather than with taking the characters on a new adventure, whole new characters in the similar setting. That happens to me all the time. And people often ask, are you going to do a sequel to this one? And I'm like, well, convince all your friends to buy a copy. And then maybe I will.
But don't you think that timing can be a factor in a book's success? I mean, so society is always changing and evolving. So a book that you wrote maybe like 5 or 6 years ago that didn't do so well, if they were released today or released jointly with the sequel, would do way better now because the audience is now at that point?
Definitely, especially if some sort of societal thing gained traction and I thought, hey, I've already written about this, and then I tell more people about it. If it sells more at that time, then I definitely think about a sequel. I think timing is most important in a series because you can't let too much time go between books in a series, or otherwise people will forget what the heck is happening. But for books that are just set in the same universe, I think the elements of the book would definitely evolve, as the world is evolving, as the author is evolving. But as far as points that people really seem to like or get or didn't like or something, a lot of times that stays a little bit constant, at least in the lesbian fiction universe. But I know if I definitely saw really, we're is a society really interested in Vikings right now, and I'd be like, I have an old Viking book that I would, then talk about. But it's it's very hard to just barge into places in the internet and be like, I have a book about that, and not seem like
you can do it
incredibly...
now. You want to give some shout out to a past book? Go ahead.
Yes, if you like lesbian Vikings, I wrote a book called Thrall, Beyond Golden Glory a few years ago, that you can find out there in any bookstore. But that's one of my favorites, just because it was really fun to write, to write lesbian Vikings, and then to yell that at conventions if I'm selling books, or I go to a lot of Pride festivals if I'm selling books, and I yell, hey, come get your lesbian Vikings. People usually take notice.
Well, lesbian Viking lovers,
yeah, they do.
Have your next read.
Yeah, it's just called Thrall. It's got a subtitle of the Beyond Golden Glory, but usually if you look up my name and Thrall, Thrall, you'll find it. Those are my lesbian Vikings, and I would love to write more lesbian Viking stories, but said unfortunately, I think the Viking fascination craze has passed a little bit. But if it ever comes back, boy, I've got my Vikings ready to go.
In terms of writing again, like beta readers and reviews, do you use beta readers or do you read your reviews, and how important are they to your writing process?
I have beta readers. I have a writing group where we all exchange manuscripts and then give each other our ideas or criticisms, or search each other's work for typos. It's been extremely helpful to me, and I highly recommend it, though I know some people can't do beta readers. Reviews, I try not to read them. It's really difficult, but I tell especially new writers, don't read your reviews. But and then we do it anyway, especially if it's a something like Publishers Weekly or something writes a review. Well, you're going to read that. But I tell people just stay off Goodreads completely because I'm like, that's not for you as a writer. Those are for readers to talk to each other. Don't look at it. And then they go and look at it. And I break my own rule and go look at it. But I know I tend not to try not to read reviews because they very often have stuff that will help. I mean, it's a nice ego boost if somebody likes the book. But if somebody doesn't like a book, a lot of times it can be for whatever reason, right? Because it's very personal whether you like a book or not. And sometimes it's like, okay, fair. You know, they didn't like it for this reason. But more often it's like if they're like, oh, a book is too long, a book is too short. And it's like, that's not really helpful. Especially I loved one time one of my books had back-to-back reviews on Goodreads, one saying it was too long and one saying it was too short. And I was like, okay, that's not for me.
So you use beta readers and writer groups. Do you use sensitivity readers too?
I do if I'm writing something that's very far outside of my experience. Then I will use a sensitivity reader. Often I can get away with not having to use one, though, because I make up my own world. So what I say goes as to a person's experiences. So I think if an author is writing about a character in the real world and they're going for real world experiences, you have to talk to somebody who's had those experiences, especially from a character or a group of people who've been disenfranchised in any way or who've been targeted by bigoted people. Really talking to people, reading accounts and stuff. I think that is so important. In a fantasy world, so you can get rid of, you can go a little further because you can say, oh, a character is unlike me in all of these ways, but their experiences are what I say they are. So I'm like, okay, well, this character in the real world might have received this sort of treatment, but in my world, they're a hero or something. So I can go a little further in that way. But I will definitely use one if I'm in the real world in any way and I think, okay, I want this character to be in here, but I haven't had their experiences and I don't know what it's like to live this life. So then I'm like, okay, I have to have somebody read this.
You're an author living in Texas, and pardon my ignorance, maybe because I'm from Canada, from Quebec, and how is it to write queer and defranchise fiction in a state that sometimes is more right-wing and more discriminative than others place?
No, you're on the money there. It can be very discriminatory. The whole state can. And on one side, I like it because I feel like I'm kind of giving the middle finger to that and saying I'm going to do my thing, and this isn't going away. I'm very lucky in that the spaces where I share my writing and where I share my love of nerd culture and are more accepting than other spaces, so that I don't often run into bigotry. I have before, and usually it's just, people looking shocked, as they read the back of the book and they're like, 2 women, and then it's like, if I'm just like, go away, and then they'll go away. But it is hard to not see my work very often here, because most of the bookstores you go to, if they have a section for LGBT plus literature, it's usually teeny tiny and it's hidden way back by social studies and far from the fiction section. And it's like, okay, and I can see why you did this so that people, one, can find it, which is nice. But then two, it's definitely hidden. And then a lot of bookstores, of course, just don't have that section here. So if you walk into them, you're like, where is this? And they're like, no, we don't do that. So I've only seen my book in bookstores here, usually in like used bookstores. A lot of times they're pretty good for having any kind of section with any kind of queer fiction. But like Barnes and Noble or one of the big bookstores, I can't usually just walk in and see, there it is. So that's difficult. But thankfully, my fans and supporters are wonderful people who'll send me pictures of bookstores in more welcoming places where there it is, there's my book on the shelf. That's always fun to see. So it's hard in that way, but I feel like I'm not, one of the reasons I'm not going to stop writing is because I live here, and so that I can say, hey, we exist here. And then we're not going anywhere, and there's nothing you can do to stop me. So I like saying that living here, but there are many, many times I think I'd like to live somewhere else.
Thank you very much for your answer.
I got a lovely message one time from a woman who, I don't want to say which country because I might get it wrong, but she lived in Eastern Europe, and being gay was criminal there. And she got a bootleg copy of my book from somewhere. And I thought that's just wonderful. And she wanted to thank me for writing this, because she said she doesn't often get to see this where she lives. And I thought that was just fantastic. And, I want her to be safe. Do whatever you have to do to be safe. But I thought that was great.
You're a trailblazer.
Oh, thank
Just
you.
remind that. Keep that in mind.
Can I ask, what's the best part for you about being a writer, and what's the most frustrating part?
I think the best feeling is hearing from readers, and hearing that they see themselves in my book, and they love that because they rarely see themselves in my book or in fiction at all. I love hearing that, and I love hearing that. I think the greatest compliment a writer can get is that you make real people feel real feelings about fake people. And I think that's wonderful if you can show somebody a different perspective and actually, change how they feel about it. One of the most frustrating things is when people misinterpret something I've written or draw a conclusion based on no evidence and say, okay, this book is blah. And then they tell a bunch of people, and it's like, that's not true, even a little bit. If you research that even a little bit, I had somebody say one time, they were like, they didn't like my books because it was like, all about teenagers having sex. And I was like, but what? They said something about 15-year-olds. And I'm like, I haven't written a book about somebody who's 15. One, and then two, I wouldn't write explicit sex scenes with a 15-year-old, and I don't write explicit sex scenes. So it's just all these different things. And it was like, are these people like out to try and destroy you, like destroy your reputation, or are they just, misanthropes who hate everybody? What's going on here? So that's very frustrating. And as an author, you can't always clap back at that. Sometimes you just got to let it go. It's like, you're not supposed to respond to reviews, so it's hard to say to anything. But I think if somebody's got something factually incorrect, that you can say that's not true at all, But then oftentimes if that person is just trying to troll you, then you're feeding into it by responding to them anyway. So I think that's the frustrating bit, is keeping myself from responding to things that are factually inaccurate, and then keeping myself from making 100 fake accounts so that I can finally reply to people who get stuff wrong. Now, it's really up to if a fan or somebody cares enough to respond, then they can respond. But I've told writers before, Goodreads is not for writers, it's for readers. So stay off of there, because you can find really good reviews on there and really in-depth discussions. And then you can find people saying, I hate this book because it didn't star a 600-pound gorilla named Tanya. And they're like, what? That doesn't have anything to do with anything. But then it's like, well, whatever. That's not for me. Stay off of there.
If you could take any piece of art in the world, whether a poem, a book, music, a painting, whatever, and you could have created it, which piece of art would it be?
Oh, Lord. That's a great question. I think a lot of times I wish I could design things like an architect does, like a building architect, because there are so many wonderful looking buildings in the world, from old medieval churches to really technological wonders now that are made of like glass and steel. I always thought, what must it be like to just look at a skyline or look at something and just see what building could go there just perfectly, and then come up with something wonderful like that. So it's just, or even a painter, it's like the Sistine Chapel. People think of it, you just looked at a ceiling and was like, oh, I'll know what I'll paint here, instead of most people who are just like, oh, beige. To just see something like that and fill that space in your head and just see it. And I think that's just amazing. I've seen, like, you'll see lots of old churches or older, like, big castles or something where everything on the ceiling is, like, intricately carved. And you're like, okay, did they just make that piece by piece and then put it up there? Or did somebody have to lay up there on some scaffolding and carve that out? And it's just crazy to think about just the sheer time that they had to put into it. And then, like, you had to be dedicated. I mean, you had to love ceilings to really take this on.
And probably would have taken them their entire lifetime, right, to create those muscles.
Yeah.
We don't.
Yeah, well, I guess if you were like, I'm going to do one thing, I'm going to do one thing in life, so it's going to be great.
Do you have any advice for new writers?
Yes, I tell new writers, do not edit as you write, as you go along. When you're writing your first draft, don't go back. Because if you go back, you'll edit and re-edit forever, and you'll get caught in a loop, and you won't finish anything. So just finish it. Keep going, even if it's terrible. Allow yourself the space to write terrible things. Just get to from the beginning to the end, because then you can go back and you can edit yourself. But as you're going, don't, because otherwise you'll never finish anything.
Could you tell us something about yourself that most people wouldn't expect?
I think from stuff like panels I've done or conventions I've done that people think I'm very extroverted. I talk a lot. I'll make little jokes and things and stuff, and I'm actually incredibly introverted. So I have a persona that I call Con Barbara, where she goes to conventions and things and does stuff. And while I just kind of sit in this head and watch. And so oftentimes if I will do a panel or something where I have to moderate, I have to talk a lot, and I have to be really on and attentive, and I can't let my mind wander and all this stuff, then I will go and sit by myself for at least half an hour. And at conventions, sometimes I've even done this in a bathroom stall where I just have to go and be like, okay, surrounded by four walls in my own space, breathe. And actually, after I did a presentation one time that turned out really well, it was really funny. Everyone was very engaged. Everyone said how much they liked it. I actually had to go back to my hotel room and cry just because it was like so many emotions, and now they come out, and now we're done. And so that would be the people who know me really well know that about me, and I guess know everyone too. But I think a lot of times people are very, very surprised when that happens. Especially I think they would be if they found me in tears, and I would have to tell them that I'm just processing this. So yeah, I think that's probably surprises a lot of people.
So it's Con Barbara because it's convention Barbara or con artist?
A little bit of both. No, convention Barbara, yes, but also con artist Barbara, because that's not really the real me.
Okay. We're at the this or that section of this video. This or that. Art or sports?
Art.
Visual art or literary art?
Both.
Salt or sugar?
Sugar.
Vanilla or chocolate?
Vanilla if I have to.
Hot or cold?
Cold.
Spring or summer?
Spring.
Night or day?
Night.
Socks or blankets?
Blankets?
Restaurant, bar, or cafe?
It's supposed to be quick, but it depends on what part of the world I'm in. I'm going to go with restaurant for right now.
Cinema or theater?
Probably just cinema.
Live convention or Zoom convention?
I'm going to say live convention right now, just because I haven't been to one in so long.
That's good. So that was our question.
Thanks very much for joining us today, Barbara. It was great to chat to you.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Do you have any message for your readers?
Yes. Thank you for supporting your favorite authors or authors that might not get support otherwise. And just please keep reading and keep talking about the books you love.